Thank you, Amos. Just as there's no free lunch, there's no free honor. And so part of tonight is for me to work a little bit. So before I speak, I will say something. Okay, you're listening. You're listening. Amos, thank you. Thank you for your words. Thank you for this evening, this opportunity. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. On the other hand, one must say that if you can stand up and hear these things, it's much, much better than anything else. So I'm getting used to it, as difficult as it is. I think what's more difficult is being thanked. And some of you who I've met earlier bring back a lot of magnificent, wonderful, special memories. And some of the words that I hear is a thank you. And that's probably even more uncomfortable. I have been so privileged. I have been so lucky. I have been to have survived as a child the Shoah, and to have had an opportunity for my adult life for the last 50 years to do what I do. But most special is the relationship that I have been privileged to establish in this wonderful Meshuggah place called the land of the Jewish people, Eretz Israel. To have had the opportunity almost to get to know you, to be privileged, to be able to not only bond, friends, but to learn, to understand, to struggle with so many of you on issues which may or not be on the level of existentialist, but they dealt with Jewish safety, Jewish survival, Jewish well-being. And to have that opportunity every single day, what a privilege, what a zchus. And so I stand here saying to you, thank you. Thank you for making it possible for me to feel at home, to feel part of you, and to together try to better the destiny, the safety and security, well-being of our people. Okay, now for the speech. So formally, I want to thank you as a friend and esteemed colleague for this lovely gathering and for the honor that you've given me to single me out. The respect I have for you, Amos, as a unique thinker, as an analyst, as a true patriot, and as a human being are beyond measure. So I say it to you personally. It's a great opportunity to say it publicly amongst your peers and friends. On the institutional level, you have always responded positively to my requests, whether they were conversations about the then current situation or to present your insight to our lay leadership. And as I enter this new phase of my life, I express to you, Amos, and wish you that you continue doing what you are doing, all of which is so critical to the well-being of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. Okay, now to delegitimization. All of us who are engaged in support of Israel and who care deeply about its well-being experience almost on a daily basis today efforts to delegitimize the Jewish state. The question that I've been asked or I've selected to address in a few moments before the panel begins is whether, from my perspective, there's something new in these efforts and whether they pose a strategic threat to Israel. Amos has already put part of the answer, which I think we probably need to discuss, and that is the existentiality of this new threat. One of the benefits of having been around in this business as long as I have is that one has seen it all. So in many ways, delegitimizing Israel is as old as the state itself, and I've seen it in all its manifestations. When the Arab world failed in its attempt to destroy the new state of Israel in its infancy, the main tool employed against Israel was that of delegitimization. The Arab League boycott of Israel and all those who did business with it was the initial delegitimization tool. It not only was intended to weaken Israel economically, but it was to make a clear statement that Israel should not be accepted as a normal entity. Along with this was the Arab refusal to have anything to do with Israel, or even threaten those who have something to do with Israel that they will not be dealt with, which dominated the scene in the Middle East until Anwar Sadat made his historic visit in 1977. The other major effort to delegitimize Israel, one which went beyond past ones in several ways, was the passage of Zionism as Racism resolution in the General Assembly of the United Nations in 1975. This added new dimensions by bringing in to the concept of delegitimization larger numbers of nation states around the world. Moreover, by accusing Israel through its founding Zionist ideology of racism, one of the taboos of international life, the UN was in effect declaring that the very idea of a Jewish state is anathema and illegitimate. And then they played it out in Durban, in Beijing, and all kinds of various international conferences. My point is that Israel has had to live with delegitimization campaigns almost since its creation, and in that sense, there's nothing new in the current campaigns. But if that is all we could say on the subject, then we could conclude that we shouldn't get too overwrought about it as much as we don't like it. After all, Israel has done very nicely in spite of all these earlier campaigns, and in fact, some will even argue that the boycott was a stimulus for Israel to move in certain areas and directions which maybe it wouldn't have as efficiently, as effectively, as diligently, as vigorously because of the boycott. But there are significant differences this time around, differences that I believe, and as you've heard, Amos believes, raise greater concerns. First is the appearance of such campaigns in the United States. A major reason why earlier campaigns did not amount to much was because they really made no impact to speak of in America. Now we see at least 25 campuses in the U.S. where student resolutions to boycott Israel have either passed or been seriously considered, while in no cases were these resolutions accepted by university administrations, and while in some cases small groups, 10, 12, 20 groups of students controlled the votes, their acceptance by students' group lend credibility to the concept. The acceptance, even on smaller numbers, but in the entity of a university and college setting, lend credibility to this concept. Second, a number of mainstream Protestant churches, particularly Presbyterians, have taken up and voted for divestment from Israel initiatives. Third, even some Jewish individuals, whether through organizations or as faculty, have taken up the cause, lending it credibility from another direction. Fourth, delegitimization expands through lawfare activity and the potential use of the International Criminal Court against Israel. And finally, the general tension, what Amos talked about as one of the great challenges, the general tension in U.S.-Israeli relations and the threat of an administration not to veto a Security Council resolution on a Palestinian issue psychologically gives space to those who seek to delegitimize Israel, its mischief, and legitimization. Other factors besides the erosion in the U.S. come into play as well. The Europeans are feeling emboldened and look to be in the first stages of taking action by labeling products that come from Israeli settlements. Whatever one's view of these steps, and I think they're very dangerous, even with their distinction between Israel proper and the territories, they signal a weakening of relationship between Israel and the EU and open the door to further EU measures against Israel in the realm and in the world of delegitimization, all of which will add to the impression in some circles that Israel is less than a legitimate state. I am always reminded, and I remind some people, that I remember when I became 50 years ago, before I took on the job of working in the ADL, I did a survey and a study of the future of the Jewish people of Israel, what the prognosticators were predicting. And I remember one of the things they said in 1965, that within 50 years, Israel will be part of a normal state amongst the community of nations. And amongst some of the other predictions, there too they were wrong. Because you tell me what country in the world, 67 years after its existence, still has to defend its right to determine its capital, Jerusalem. What kind of an absurdity is it? What kind of legitimate acceptance of a sovereignty is even its greatest ally, its special relationship ally, the United States of America, 67 years later, still does not accept or recognize Jerusalem? And then I don't need to remind you how many times Israel needs to defend its right to defend itself. So that, too, is out of the legitimacy norm. And go back, and if the Security Council resolution opposed vehemently by Israel, but not vetoed by the U.S., ever comes to pass, the floodgates of country actions against Israel may open again under the guise of delegitimization. In other characteristics that strike me as different about the current surge of delegitimization is its increasingly grassroots element. I'm not suggesting that the average citizen, either in Europe or America, is involved, but I do see a deeper involvement by different groups in society, not only Muslims, various left-wing bodies and individuals who buy into the outrageous ideas of comparing Israel to apartheid South Africa. And the silent majority is too often just that, silent. As we see on some campuses, they allow the anti-Israel forces to have their way, either because they're ignorant, apathetic, or they may have some issues with Israel. And on some campuses, that we've seen in a New York Times story only yesterday, minority communities exclude Jews as representing the establishment and supporting the apartheid state of Israel. In sum, we have survived many earlier efforts of delegitimizing Israel, but there is enough that's different now to take it seriously and to devise ways to combat it. I begin with the thought that the target group is not the delegitimizers, who largely are way beyond persuasion. The focus should be in convincing those who quietly acquiesce or have minimal sympathies with these efforts. Those folks might be persuaded to rethink. Partly it needs to be an educational effort. One does not have to agree with every Israeli policy vis-a-vis the Palestinians to recognize that the Jewish people have a fundamental right to their own state, sanctioned by historic connections, to the land in UN decision of 47. To deny this entitlement to Jews that is accorded other nations, including Palestinians, which is the main goal of delegitimization, is unfair and smacks of anti-Semitism. Second, as regarding so much about the conflict, many people are not aware of the many efforts towards peace Israel has undertaken. These facts of history can never be repeated enough, not only to set the record straight, but to make clear that it is Israel that is the party that has sought reconciliation. Finally, the question arises, what can the government of Israel do to ease delegitimization initiatives? So again, for many, there is nothing that Israel could do that would satisfy other than disappear. Others, however, might ease their views depending on what they see coming out of Israel. Obviously, Israel should never jeopardize its security to satisfy world opinion. As a bottom line in response to the question posed to me, how different is it, how serious is it, I fell somewhere in the middle. I don't believe the sky is falling, and it's not a crisis of the first order. But because of the factors I spoke about, I think we need to staunch the bleeding so that it does not turn into a crisis down the road. And finally, there's something I believe which is beyond the target of boycotts and sanctions. I'm beginning to believe that this is an effort directed much further down the line. That the object is not the boycott or sanctions. These are not stupid people. They know that their efforts on campus, even if they succeed, even if they win in the resolutions and they're voted, they know that the administrations of the universities, certainly in the United States, will not act on it. They will not implement it, they will not sanction the sanctions, and that it will not happen. So why? Why, if knowing that when you succeed, in fact, which they haven't, nothing really will happen, why this intense effort? So I don't think that the target is sanctions or boycott. It's the atmospherics, it's the visual, it's the image, it's the impression, it's the leadership of future America. Because we do live in an apathetic, ignorant environment on campus. Most of the people don't care. But this campaign leaves an everlasting image of Israel. An Israel which is uncaring, which is apartheid, which is negative, which is unfeeling, which is take it in any sense that you want. 10 years, 20 years later, when these students go out in life in whatever they do, what is that impression? What is that image that they have? And it's an image that they've experienced for the 3 or 4 years of hearing and seeing and witnessing Israel in that evil apartheid mode. That's the objective. It's to poison the minds of the future. Because as we know, this battle has gone on for 100 years. It's not over tomorrow. And that makes it that much more sinister. And maybe not existential. But it is a very, very serious challenge that we cannot afford to neglect, poo-poo, or say, well, they haven't really won. You cannot list victories, but victory is the minds and the heart and the future of the leadership, at least in the United States and certainly in many parts of Europe. Thank you very, very much.